record button and welcome you guys to Art 116 on a lovely Friday, halfway between sun and rain. Moving into the weekend, this should be good. And if you need to say anything, you just go right ahead and unmute your mic and speak up. I have bumped up my volume so that I can actually hear you guys when you say something. And you will get a word in edgewise because as soon as somebody says something, I stop talking and become attentive. In the meantime, I want to talk about this stuff that we've been doing so far. These are my two demonstrations, one for the morning class, one for the afternoon class, where we were using a color complement pair. So it has to be two colors opposite each other on the color wheel. And then we were trying to neutralize each color with a little bit of its complement and neutralizing in a nice incremental way towards a super neutral in the middle, an absolute brown of some kind. And doing the same thing from the other side, taking a tiny little bit of this color and neutralizing its complement over here, step by step by step, and trying to, again, move us in lovely little steps towards neutral in the scheme of things. And then moving down here with the same pair of complementary colors, I wanted to do something that was an investigation of values as they're opposed as they are applied to colors. And so I wanted to first do an actual value scale in black and white paint. So that was kind of new. That was a twist I threw at you guys this week. You really I wasn't good, and I didn't tell you to go out and buy black and white paint this week, but you're going to need black and white so that you can mix them together to make nice incremental shades of gray to try to get a medium gray in the middle and then be able to tint up to get nice incremental steps in the high key values to white and shade down to get nice incremental steps in the deep key values towards black. And once we have a value scale established in black and white, then we try to take our two colors and put them into the boxes where they correspond to, on a value scale. Full spectrum intensity blue, where does that sit? That one sits here. This is where full spectrum intensity blue is, I think. And then adding a little bit of black to it gets me one shade darker, and adding a bit more black, and boom, I'm there at black blue down there at the bottom. The same thing, starting from full spectrum intensity blue, adding white, trying to get incremental value changes going up to a white or whitish, bluish white up at the top. And a similar thing for orange, except orange starts here in this box because I printed that on the page. So that gave us a kind of a hint of where to go. So starting with orange, tinting up with white, and shading down with black, trying to get nice incremental value changes, and hopefully they also correspond and read horizontally so that all of these incremental value changes are the same, whether you're in the blue color or its complementary color over here, or in just shades of black and white. We get these nice incremental values that go all the way up, all three of the scales that we're looking at. And I did a yellow and violet one for one class and an orange and blue one for another class. And I did not do green and red because I figured you guys would probably do green and red, or your choice. Did anybody do green and red? That's a simple question I can ask. If anybody did green and red, unmute that microphone and let me know that you did green and red. I bet you didn't.
I did.
You did?
I did.
Yeah, I was thinking about doing green and red too.
Well, good. Okay, that's fantastic. I do have my PowerPoint open on the desktop, so I'm going to do a quick screen share, 2 or 3 slides screen share really, really fast just to get this thing going here. So let me do that. Okay. So in your text, your authors actually gave us this example on one of the first 5 or 6 pages in chapter 7, where we got a value scale in the middle here. And this is a 9-step value scale right here in the middle. And then your authors was giving us the corresponding value or step on the value scale that each color would be at full spectrum intensity. So violet is over here, and blue violet, and then blue would be here. And then our greens, blue, green, and yellow, green are up here. I was really interested that they did put all of the cool colors on one side, and then they put all of the warm colors on the other side. That's really friendly and helpful. And they did that corresponding to where the warm colors are on the value scale over on the left, I'm sorry, on the color wheel. Over on the left side of the color wheel, we're going to find most of our warm colors. And over on the right side of the color wheel, we find all of our cool colors. So our warm colors are over here, trying once again to correspond to their steps on a value scale, which I thought was really cool. Now, I really only wanted you guys to deal with the 3 primary colors and the 3 secondary colors to come up with, you know, one set of complementary colors, either yellow and violet, orange and blue, or red and green would be your, complementary color pair that you could choose from. Because that way we've got the paint in full spectrum intensity that we can work with to do that color when we're painting it. This is also kind of an example of what happens when we neutralize color from a full spectrum intensity color to adding, gray and different shades of gray, either a high key gray, a medium key gray, or a low key gray, as the color is neutralized. And so this is where I kind of came up with this idea that we could actually neutralize colors and do it on a value scale. This is another just example from the textbook that talks about, full spectrum color over here, and then we can actually change its value by adding black or adding white to it. But when we do that, we also change its intensity too. The color becomes less intense and somewhat neutralized as we add white and black to it. And also it becomes, it expresses itself as a different value of color, either a shade of that color or a tint of that color, depending on if you're adding white or black to the color. So I took this, and that's how I kind of created these value scales and stuff. And this one, just, an illustration of neutralizing color with its complement. And that's what we're doing on the template, on the horizontal blending line on our template. We're neutralizing a color with its complement. And the more you add of the complement, the more you get to a fully neutralized brown, usually in the middle of the color wheel. In our tertiary colors, this middle area of the color wheel approaching the center, that's where all those wonderful little tertiary colors live. And those 3 stupid slides are about all I've got to kind of illustrate this thing. So I wanted you guys to try to finish this up today or over the weekend. I think it's coming due one of these days really soon, but then I've extended the deadline to accept late ones for another, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 days to make sure that you get a chance to get it done and get it in. So are there any questions or comments, or, gee, Mr. Fritz, this is a really stupid project? Because I will accept those too without any, harm or foul to you guys, if you wanted to make a comment.
I had a question about colors, actually.
Yes, please.
The kit that I bought came with like 3 shades of blue, and I just picked the one in the middle for like the true blue on the color wheel. How would you determine a true blue? Is that generally the one that's kind of between the light and the dark blue?
Yeah, that's a really good way of doing it, and that's what I would have done too. Because one blue would have seemed too light to my eyes, and the other blue would have seemed too dark to my eyes, although they're probably all at kind of full spectrum intensity. But the middle blue, something that we might call royal blue, sky blue's even too light. A royal blue feels like it's the right color blue to work with based on the color wheel. So you have a good instinct there. That was good. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
The other question I had too was about purple, because it didn't come with a purple. And
Uh-oh.
like if you wanted to get like a true violet or true purple? Would that just be equal parts red and blue?
Well, equivalent parts, because it really depends on the strength of the pigment. And yeah, you can mix red and blue together to get a violet. Because they're pigments, and it's not perfect, it's really hard to make a full spectrum intensity violet. I would recommend, if you're ever in Walmart, grab one of the individually packaged violet bottles. I can't find my violet right now, so I just grabbed whatever was handy. Yeah, I have violet right here. 97 cents, and then you're set. This one's gloss, and I always like using gloss better than matte because I think it just has better color coverage, and it's a stronger color to mix with. So, but these are 97 cents individual on the racks. They've got these racks full of these bottles of varying colors and stuff. And this one is called Purple Velvet. They're not doing me any favors by not calling it violet, because violet is the preferred color. The name of the hue, the technical name of the hue is violet. So that's that. Okay, I have delayed as long as I can, and I just can't get this thing. I can't delay things anymore. I wanted to start talking about the next project, even though I don't even have it uploaded into coursework yet. So I'm drying this thing because I painted this 15 minutes ago, and it was supposed to be dry by now. But anyway, so let's try this camera thing again. All right. So I want to do a project where we're going to use two big shapes that are going to be a complementary color pair, and you can choose which color complements you want to work with. But usually I will take the paint and the biggest paintbrush that I have, and just kind of take one piece of either Bristol board or watercolor board, whatever you got, and paint a big shape on there. Two big shapes, so that you got all kinds of choices in terms of how you're going to cut those out and make your actual shape out of it. So I usually divide it on the diagonal and paint one half, one complementary color, and the other half the other complementary color. Then, as you might be able to see on the edges here on the ends, I took a little bit of the color complement to mix it in here and try to neutralize, in this case, the green. So I've got a somewhat neutralized green strip here. It's not full spectrum intensity green, but it is still green. And I've done the same thing. I took a little bit of green and mixed it in with red, and I tried to make a neutralized red along one edge, so that I've got a strip that I can work with that's going to be a neutralized red, because I wanted to do this next project here. I have, well, the project is investigating what happens with simultaneous contrast. Simultaneous contrast is the next great big thing that we're talking about in this chapter. Simultaneous contrast is when two full spectrum intensity colors come in direct contact with each other because they're overlapping or sharing an edge or something. And so you get this very bright, very vibrant, vibrating of kind of colors that almost will give you a heart attack or a headache from looking at it. And I've been teaching this class for 20 years and using the Vogue fashion magazines. And if I couldn't get Vogue, then it was Mademoiselle or Cosmopolitan or something like that. A fashion magazine that deals, with the fashion industry in New York City. And to my horror, those magazines went out of business and stopped publishing this month anyway. So December was their last month, and they're out of business now. And I liked fashion magazines because I could always cut out some big shape out of a fashion magazine that gave me really good, vivid colors. And so I got these blueberries, and they probably even came out of a different magazine, like Good Housekeeping or something that was talking about blueberries. And while we think that blueberries are really blue, technically I see a lot of neutralized color in this blueberry. So I see highlights and hot spots on some of these blueberries that are quite white and not really deep blue, like the royal blue that we were talking about. But the illusion is that the blueberries are super blue. And so, cutting out a photograph of blueberries and sticking them against a big piece of painted orange still worked for me because it felt like I had a vivid simultaneous contrast area of the composition happening. So on another piece of paper, on another piece of Bristol board, I painted the orange on there and let it dry. And then I just kind of cut it out really fast and blasted those two together to get my large area of simultaneous contrast happening. The secondary part of this assignment is going to be taking a somewhat neutralized version of the color complement and having it overlap or share an edge, usually on the outside edge because it's doing a secondary thing in a secondary place in the composition, and trying to show that a neutralized version of blue harmonizes better with its full strength color complement orange. So this part of the composition actually neutralizes better. It does not exhibit quite as much simultaneous contrast. It's to show the designer that when you're working with colors, it's kind of nice to have maybe one bright color that's full spectrum intensity, but another color may need to be somewhat neutralized so that the two colors can harmonize better in the composition, whatever that composition is, a painting, any kind of a design, even a web design, that kind of thing. Same thing on the other end of this thing, using a neutralized orange, overlapping or making physical contact with the blue kind of shows that they harmonize so much better. They don't create as much simultaneous contrast as what's happening in the middle of this composition when the brights are definitely fighting with each other. And so this morning, for the morning class, you guys always get the benefit of what I did for the morning class when I get to the afternoon. Well, I did this thing here in the morning class, and I'm still trying to dry this out. So I'm going to do this for you. My color complements happened to be yellow and violet that I wanted to play with. And so I made those two like large triangular shapes, and then I tried to, with a scissors, cut out a shape that kind of, I don't know, somehow spoke to the colors that I chose. And I wanted the shapes to even be different from each other, kind of like what's going on with the blueberries and the orange over here, so that the shapes have a different quality to them. And that kind of helps to just reinforce the idea that the simultaneous contrast happens in a strong way too. So I came up with this eggplant kind of shape. It's just kind of a blob that has rounded edges on it so that it feels an awful lot like an organic form like eggplant. And then this one, because it was yellow, I was thinking lightning bolt because, yellow and lightning bolt and everything. I wanted kind of a fat lightning bolt because I really need a great big shape that's kind of fat and kind of long to kind of overlap and deal with creating that idea of simultaneous contrast between the two shapes. So that's kind of what I did. And then I like to do this as a collage where I'm cutting these out and so that I can move them around on my compositional space to see how they work together. Do I want to go like completely overlapping one shape over the top of the other? Do I want to overlap them a bit, but give myself a big expression of violet on one side and a big expression of yellow here, and then have the interaction of the two along kind of a jaggedy edge play up the idea of the simultaneous contrast, which, that's what I wanted to do. Now I could do this, and then I get a lot more, violet in the picture overlapping the yellow, but then the yellow doesn't quite provide quite as much simultaneous contrast or interest as it does when it's doing this kind of thing here. So I kind of came up with that. And then I've got neutralized versions of the orange, of the yellow and the violet. And so the idea was, well, how do I overlap smaller shapes? And what should I do for those smaller shapes? Now, I have a theory design theory that it's kind of nice to pick a shape and then just make copies of it so that you get this kind of repetition of form of that shape, and kind of set them on here with the same orientation in space so that it really repeats quite nicely, because that creates a lot of visual linkages that help pull the composition together a little stronger. And since this thing was zigzaggy as a uh, lightning bolt shape, I went with something that was like triangles for the color, the neutralized version of the color, so that they kind of relate to each other formally in a kind of a shape way. The triangles sort of relate to the lightning bolt because they've got sharp angles and sharp corners on them, and that kind of made sense. The same thing kind of happened when I was playing with the idea of the um, neutralized versions of the violet. You can overlap this and you get this repetition of form, and so that kind of holds together in as a visual linkage a lot better. It definitely uh, exhibits less simultaneous contrast in the way that it interacts with the yellow, because it's a somewhat neutralized version of the violet. And you can play with this, overlapping either way. You can either even overlap it, underlap it, underneath the lightning bolt if you want to, and you get that kind of thing. But the real reason that I like doing this as a collage with loose elements that I can push around in a compositional format is so that I can try to make this fit in my compositional space. And so right now it's kind of shifted over to the right just a little bit, a little too much negative space on one side, a little too little negative space on the other side. The balance isn't quite right for the compositional space. So I want to be able to find how this actually sits, a little bit more comfortably or confidently in my compositional space, so that I've got similar amounts of margin on both sides, similar amounts of margin top to bottom, when it feels like visually the elements fit into the compositional space and command the compositional space well, but don't create any unnecessary tension. Then I can glue these things down. You are welcome to try to paint this as a painting if you want to, and instead of cutting these out as individual shapes and collaging them, you can just paint all of this onto some kind of a support like Bristol board or watercolor board or something like that. But you run the risk of not being able to manage your composition in the end and having it shifted over one way, or the balances aren't right, or you get all the vagaries and vicissitudes of a painting where you have to keep playing with paint and stuff until the paint is perfect. And this way, we're just cutting out shapes, and then we've got the individual shapes that we can kind of play with and push them in and out of the composition, adjust their angles, adjust everything about them until they're doing exactly what we want them to do. I haven't tried this before. I was going to put a point underneath, I mean, the little circles underneath the points, and see if that was an interesting way, because I hadn't tried that before. I had these always on the flats. That's kind of interesting. I could work with that. Okay, so that's the kind of cool thing about collaging, is that you can play with the the interaction of elements and to see how they work together in a composition and how they balance until they really satisfy your needs as an artist and a designer. And then you can glue them down, and then you've got it. You've got the composition in the compositional space with all of your spacings, and everything is balanced out and working together as possible. That's why I like this thing. So I was going to actually do one for you guys today, if I could get this paint to dry. It's mostly dry. It's kind of dry. So I was going to cut these out. I guess I'm going to cut the strip of neutralized green and red off of each end and save this, save the liver, save that piece for later. and this neutralized strip of red too. I'm just going to cut that off because I can cut those into shapes later on. So I'm putting those off to the side, and then I'm going to cut these apart and then try to figure out what kind of shapes to make out of these. Sometimes with this, we can make arbitrary shapes, and it's no problem. I could make a composition out of these two triangles right here, and I can overlap the triangles. And if they're sharing a really long edge, that's fantastic and everything. But I could maybe do better than that. I mean, I could ask myself, what do these things represent to me, how they might possibly work in the real world, and that kind of thing. And so I was just kind of thinking that maybe this green feels like a leaf. What would happen if I sort of made a leaf shape out of it? Would that be an interesting concept for this composition? A leaf shape is sort of a, I don't know, it's an organic shape. That's kind of nice. I've got a leaf. Oh, you know what I need? I need another sheet of Bristol board out of my Bristol board thing so that I've got a place to actually organize my compositional elements in a compositional space. So we'll throw that leaf down on here and see what happens. And so if I'm going to be literal about all this stuff and I've got a green leaf, what can I make what's red? I don't know, fire flame, something like that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing this, but I might try to cut out something that's sort of like fire or flame or something. Oh, that's kind of interesting. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to take some chances, and I'm just going to make something that may not really be flame-like. It's going to maybe be a whole lot more like a bunch of fingers on a hand, or maybe points on a on a rake or something like that. But what I'm trying to do is get some kind of really interesting interaction of shapes happening, where there's some kind of drama happening in the middle. Now I see on the points of these two things, I've got some white where I don't have the red covering it. And I really want to get rid of that white, because this is a color thing. And if you have the wrong colors out on the end of your little points, it doesn't work good for you. So I cut those little white ends off of there so that I could do boom, something like this. And then if I don't overlap them all the way and I've got these little white triangles created, well, that tends to neutralize the simultaneous contrast that I'm trying to achieve. So as much as it might look interesting to do that, I really want to push this over the top. So I've got just the two shapes that are really, really overlapping, and they are experiencing as much simultaneous contrast along as long a line of intersection between the two shapes as possible. And so all I'm going to do then is come up with some kind of secondary shapes in the composition to play with the idea of, that the neutralized versions might work better. And so I think I'll just cut this up into a bunch of little squares that then I can change into something else. So a bunch of neutralized squares on each side. Oh, but gosh, I could make these into leaves too. Maybe I'll make them a little bit longer. I'll make rectangles out of these. I only need 3. This isn't going to be terribly difficult. I might just make these into leaves, just like this, to see what happens. I'm feeling kind of nature boy today, so I thought I might play with this as a concept. So there's a leaf, and you get the idea. 2 more leaves coming at you, and pretty soon we'll have 3 leaves on one side. 3 is a magic number. 4 is okay. 5 is okay, but you need kind of a minimum of 3 to get a repetition of form. And we always feel like 3 is a pretty magic number in art and design and literature and religion and everything else. So you're going to see the idea of 3s being used an awful lot in human activities. And I can go under or I can go over. I haven't quite figured out which yet. But to get that repetition of form, Anyway, the concept is that we would have more possible simultaneous contrast in the middle, a little bit less exhibited over on the other side. Um, I was going to, cut these things into something sharp like flame or something, but for now, oh hell, I can do it really quick. What the heck? It doesn't matter. Maybe I'll make them just right for now into triangles that have a curvy bottom on them so that they're sort of like flames. If you really squint your eyes, they're kind of like fire or flames kind of coming up. Anyway, that's the idea, to try to find a way to get a primary area of the composition, usually in the center, exhibiting simultaneous contrast, a secondary area of the composition, usually on the outside edge, that exhibits less simultaneous contrast because one of the color complements is somewhat neutralized, so that we can see how neutralized colors are important in making harmonious compositional things happen when we are playing with compositions. So that's a quickie, and I'm going to play with this some more to see how it works, because we can try it as a vertical format and see if we like that orientation in space better, if it helps to make the thing happen that we want to have happen better. We can try every orientation in space. We can look at it upside down. We can look at it from another angle just to see if there is one or another orientation in which the shapes and the colors are working the best for the way that we interpret and look at this stuff, and see how the simultaneous contrast comes off the best. When you have moved this stuff around as much as you care to, and really have decided that your spacing and everything else is working in your composition the best you can make it work, then glue it all down, and your collage is a wonderful design that illustrates simultaneous contrast for us. I'm going to pick up all my pieces and throw them in the garbage, but I'm coming back to you guys now to answer any questions or comments that you might have for me. And otherwise, I've been at it for 35 minutes and I've covered a lot of ground. I'm trying to be better at this so that I don't waste your time. Skylar, you have a question.
Hi. So I noticed, okay, so Vogue isn't producing any magazines. But so there's like no pictures for Vogue. However, I have a few pictures that I've kind of been looking at, like that I've taken personally. I was wondering if can I use those? Is that okay?
Yes, sure.
Okay. I just want to make sure. But
Provided that they have strong, large shapes of color that are full spectrum intensity color. So we would really like to have, a red or an orange or something in that color, or in that photograph, so that you could print it out, cut it out, or whatever, and use that particular color shape, and then put it right up against something that is the color complement of it. If they have lots of nuance in them, if they have textures or other colors, or things that somewhat neutralize the color to begin with, then we can't really achieve the idea of simultaneous contrast as easily. We really need bright colors and big shapes to be able to do that. But having said all that, if you do have something like that in there, sure, by all means, give it a try and use it. Are you working with digital media? Um, I forget now if you're in the digital design program and you're using
yes.
Photoshop and Illustrator. So yeah, you can use Photoshop and Illustrator, and you're doing exactly the same thing. You're using individual shapes and you're moving them around. You're clicking and dragging on them and moving them around and resizing them and all of that kind of stuff. So whether you're working in Illustrator or Photoshop, or doing this on a desktop with a pair of scissors and a paint can, you're doing the same thing. It's all collage at this point. So you can work with imagery and do that, and that's fine. Or you can just use these kinds of uh, more abstract shapes if you want to, and just do it in paint, and that's fine. The third option is to actually paint a picture. If you fancy yourself as a painter and you want to paint an image that is, a landscape or a still life or something, and it has a couple of big shapes in it that are color complements that are sharing an edge or overlapping enough so that they are, demonstrating simultaneous contrast. You could actually compose a painting and do that. That's a lot more work than this little project is asking for. But if that's what you're comfortable with, you can do that too. How's that work for you, Skylar? Does that answer your question plus too much information?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
You're welcome. Um, but I've got painters sometimes in this class, and they want to paint a painting. So I say, go for it. You paint yourself a painting, and that'll be fantastic, as long as it can illustrate simultaneous contrast. And the designers have very powerful tools that they can use to create this stuff. And you can go out on the internet and steal photographic images to then, once again, use to, you're changing the composition, you're changing the way that those elements and those images look. So it's not really stealing, it's what we call appropriation. We appropriate everything in sight in art. And if we can appropriate it and then repackage it for our own use, then it works. Then it's not stealing the original art from an original artist using their original intent. We're repurposing it for something else, and that's fair use. Artists and designers can do that without having to quote the source every darn time. So that's a thing. Now I've been at it for 40 minutes, and I'm about ready to let you guys go for the weekend. So any questions or comments for the good of the order? I'm going to be quiet for a minute and kind of clean up my workspace here.
So the neutralized colors on there, those were neutralized with black, was it?
Well, no, they were neutralized with a little bit of their color complement, technically, in this painting. So I'm just going to go back there really quick to show that this red has been neutralized with a tiny little bit of green. And this green has been neutralized with just a tiny little bit of red paint. And that way I'm only using the two colors of paint. And so I'm using full spectrum intensity versions of the paint in the big shapes and a slightly neutralized version of those colors in the tiny shapes. And,
Cool. Yeah.
so that kind of makes it work out.
Okay, thank you.
You are welcome. So I hope that I'm not, taking all of the good ideas away by demonstrating my ideas of shapes and the way that I do things, but you can do any variation on this idea as long as you get two big shapes in the middle showing simultaneous contrast and tinier shapes out on the edges overlapping that, they show better color harmony, but they also show a design feature of repetition of form, which kind of helps pull the composition together just a little bit more. So that's a hint, that's a trick for you guys. But you can use any kind of little shapes on the periphery to make that happen. So the number and the kind of shape that you use is completely up to you. Okay, now I've really said too much. So the thing I should say is thank you. And, I will see you next week. Try to get the this other thing done and photographed and turned in so you can get credit for this. And I'll try to get an actual assignment typed up of the thing I just demonstrated today so that we can do that one too. And we'll be working on that over the weekend and the early part of next week. So I'll probably see you on Monday and we'll talk about this stuff again. But I'm going to just say goodbye for now and hope that you have a good weekend and catch you back here on Monday afternoon. So goodbye for now.